Chapter 2 People of the Dog Days. The Big Picture. Montana's first people lived by the land and knew its rhythms intimately. As the land changed, the people changed with it. You have more in common with an Ice Age teenager than you might think. You probably live in a family group of fewer than 20 people. You adapt your activities to your environment in many ways, like skiing, fishing, or drinking hot chocolate in the wintertime. You exchange what you have, money, for example, for other things you would like to have, like a book or CD. You travel to pick up supplies and sometimes just to get together to visit. You probably have met someone from far away who has introduced you to a new song, a new food, or a new way of doing something. And when you get together with your parents or your grandparents on a long winter's night, you probably engage in another universal human activity, storytelling. Life has changed quite a bit since the last Ice Age, about 13,000 years ago. But people everywhere engage in the same basic human activities. We organize our societies into groups small and large. We adapt to the land and its climate. We trade and travel. We borrow ideas and technologies from other cultures, and we learn about our world and who we are by exchanging information and telling stories. The study of history looks at these aspects of human activity: social organization, government, and politics, how people adapt to their environment, trade and economics, travel, transportation, and exploration, cultural influences and interaction among cultures, religion, beliefs, worldviews, and traditions. These 6 aspects of human activity create a big picture of a culture, a shared system of behaviors, attitudes, and understandings. Over thousands of years, people of many different cultures have lived in this place now called Montana. They all participated in the 6 aspects of human activity outlined above. Like you and your family, they laughed and struggled, made friends, competed with rivals, and figured out how to make a living. They used the resources available to them, tried new ways of doing things, and did the best they could when big changes affected their way of life. The history of Montana is their story, and you are a part of it. Ways of learning about the past. Who were the first people in Montana? Where did they come from and when? Montana's story begins with a mystery no one yet completely understands. Many scientists believe that the first humans moved into North America between 30,000 and 13,000 years ago. Others believe humans have not been here that long. Many Indian people believe that their ancestors were created here and have always lived on this land. We are constantly discovering new information about the ancient past that changes our ideas about North America's first inhabitants. There are currently 2 primary ways we learn about the ancient human past: through oral histories, traditional stories passed down over many generations, and through the science of archaeology. Oral histories, news from the beginning of time. Oral histories are important stories that people pass down from generation to generation. Oral histories mix wisdom and information together to express what the world was like for the ancestors of a certain family or society. When your parents or grandparents tell stories about what happened to them when they were young, they are sharing oral history with you. Creation stories, traditional stories that tell about the creation of the world, are oral histories too. Every culture in the world has creation stories. Some American Indian creation stories tell about things that may have happened during the last Ice Age. For example, some Indian creation stories say that animals, who reigned over the earth in ancient times, created the first summer. This may be a cultural memory of the rapid warming at the end of the last Ice Age. Some Indian stories feature enormous monsters and giant birds. Surely the giant mammals and birds of early human history must have been fearsome creatures to the comparatively small human with a handheld spear. Many cultures worldwide tell stories about a giant flood deep in their early history. The end of the most recent Ice Age could have brought worldwide flooding as glaciers melted and ice sheets broke off into the sea. For many people, creation is too important to be told in just one way. Every story from every culture has something to teach about the human experience. The many American Indian creation stories reveal important clues about how people who lived here thousands of years ago experienced their world. Archaeologists, detectives of the past. Archaeology, the scientific study of human cultures by analyzing the physical clues that people have left behind, is another way to understand the ancient past. Just as people leave a record of their lives behind them through the stories that they tell, they also leave a physical record of their activities. For example, if you look at your lunch tray after lunch, you might see an empty milk carton, a sandwich wrapper, and a napkin with cookie crumbs on it. This physical record tells a lot about what you ate for lunch. It might even reveal the year or era in which you ate it. All people leave traces of their lives behind them as artifacts, objects produced or shaped by human activity. Artifacts could be things people discarded, like garbage, an old glove, or parts of broken tools or toys. They could be ceremonial objects buried in graves or parts of building foundations. Anything that shows that human beings once inhabited a particular location is an artifact. Archaeologists, scientists who study archaeology, investigate the physical remains of human activity to learn about how people lived in previous times. By piecing together the evidence they find, archaeologists learn about what people did in a particular spot and when they did it. Archaeologists ask questions of the evidence they find. What is it? What is it made of, and where did this material come from? What was each artifact used for? When was it used? Almost all the artifacts from Montana's ancient people are either remains of cooking, fire-broken rock, seeds, and ashes, or remnants of tools, like those used for hunting, digging, processing food, or manufacturing other tools. Pollen and burned seeds indicate what kinds of plants were available for the people to use, and plant diversity tells about the climate. Tool artifacts tell a little bit about what animals the people hunted and what technologies they used, like a bow and arrow or a spear. Animal bones and teeth are also commonly found artifacts. Archaeologists can estimate how old bones and teeth are by a process called carbon dating, a scientific method of determining the age of something that was once alive. Teeth reveal the age of an animal and sometimes even the season in which it was killed. Studying the material evidence, archaeologists develop theories, sets of logical connected ideas, about the lives and habits of the people who created or used the artifacts. These theories change as new evidence is discovered. How theories change, the Bering Land Bridge controversy. Scientists often have to change their theories when someone discovers new information. The Bering Land Bridge theory is a good example. In the late 1950s, scientists began to theorize that people may have moved into the Americas across a broad region of land that connected North America and Asia. During the Ice Ages, 2 million to 10,000 years ago, sea levels fell by about 300 feet because so much of the world's water was taken up in ice sheets. When this happened, the Bering Strait between Alaska and Siberia, which now lies under a very shallow sea, became a broad region of dry land 700 miles wide, wider than Montana. Even though people call it a land bridge, it actually formed a large territory in which many animal and plant species flourished. Mammoths, bison, elk, and people spread across this territory. Many archaeologists believe that as glaciers shifted and retreated, people moved southward into North America, eventually spreading throughout Central and South America. For nearly 70 years, archaeologists thought that all humans in North and South America must have arrived in the Americas over the Bering Land Bridge. Many American Indians disagreed with this theory, because their oral histories said that their people had always been there. Then, a few years ago, new archaeological discoveries began turning up possible evidence that people lived in North America many thousands of years before the last ice age created the land bridge. For example, in 2004, archaeologists in South Carolina discovered pieces of charcoal from an ancient hearth that some think is 50,000 years old. Now scientists are expanding their theories. Some believe that different groups of people may have moved to the Americas in several waves and from many different directions, including the Bering Strait, throughout human history. For now, no one has the complete answer to the question, where did Montana's first people come from and how did they get here? People keep discovering new evidence to help answer this question. Meanwhile, it is important to recognize the value in using both oral histories and archaeology to better understand the past. Life at the end of the Ice Age. The earliest archaeological evidence of human activity in Montana dates back about 12,000 years to the end of the last Ice Age. This ancient time has many names, but is commonly called the early period. The climate shifted several times, from wet and cold to warm and dry, and back again. The region we call Montana looked very different 12,000 years ago. A vast ice sheet up to 2 miles thick covered most of northern Montana during the Ice Age. When it retreated, it left a flat plain of glacial till, sediment left behind by the glaciers, where few plants could grow. Much of northern Montana was sheared flat as a driveway with just a few scattered hills. River valleys had not begun to form. Water from the melting ice sheet would have covered this flat plain, soaking the sediments and washing fine soils out of the gravel. In some places, great glacial lakes with icebergs floating in them still covered the land. Some of these lakes drained slowly, creating outwashes of gravel. In northwest Montana, in the Yellowstone Park area, and in other scattered regions, alpine glaciers covered the mountain ranges and filled mountain valleys. In other areas, the land was tundra, semi-frozen, shallow soil where plants grow low to the ground, or
muskeg,
a swampy bog too wet to grow many kinds of plants. Where the glaciers had reached their farthest point and retreated, they left behind piled-up mounds of gravel. Over time, the glacial till developed a little topsoil. Wind and water erosion,
wearing away,
carved rivers, buttes, and benches into the flat plain. Birches and willows began growing in the river valleys, and grassland on the upland benches. The glacial lakes broke through their ice dams and drained, leaving dry sand that eventually blew into big dunes. Alpine glaciers became much smaller, and the tundra and
muskeg
dried out and began to grow dryland trees, shrubs, and grasses. Imagine the landscape of the time as a giant puzzle pattern of many different pieces. Gravel mounds, tundra,
muskeg,
swamp, sand dune, alpine glacier, forest, and grassland. All those areas have existed in Montana since the last Ice Age and are still here. They simply shift around, expand, and contract as the climate changes. Big game hunters of 14,000 to 8,000 years ago. The first people who lived in this land moved in after the ice sheet retreated. Since there were so few plants here, they ate mostly game, wild animals hunted for food. They hunted the mastodon, mammoth, and ancient bison using short, heavy spears. For their spears, these hunters crafted stone points, 6 to 12 inches long, which archaeologists now call Clovis points. These handheld spears with long points would have been useless against fast-running game, but were amazingly effective when thrust just right into the abdomen of a large animal. The people lived in small, family-based groups and traveled widely during the year to get food and supplies. They moved when the animals moved, and they adapted their lifestyle to take advantage of all the opportunities the land provided. Their belongings were simple and few, because they carried everything they owned with them. They made tools of stone, wood, and bone. They made small homes of tusk or wood poles covered with animal hides. The people could easily build and dismantle these shelters, taking the hides with them if they chose. The changing world of the Middle Period. About 8,000 years ago, after many centuries of slow climate change, the northern plains suddenly grew warmer and drier. This warm, dry period lasted about 3,000 years and drastically changed life here. In most of Montana, average temperatures rose only 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and precipitation, rain and snow, decreased by only 2 to 3 inches per year. but that slight difference was enough to shrink the wetlands of central and eastern Montana and broaden open grasslands. In the mountainous west, the grasses, forests, and tundra responded to the heat by moving up in elevation. Alpine glaciers melted or contracted, although as of 2007 there were still approximately 60 named glaciers in Montana. Giant beavers, mammoths, mastodons, and other ancient mammals already were declining and were likely wiped out as their environment changed. Over time, bison became smaller, and the grasslands filled with animals more suited to the dry plains, such as deer, antelope, and rabbits. Hunter-gatherers of 8,000 to 1,500 years ago. People's activities changed with their environment. As the large mammals disappeared, people focused more on smaller mammals. As plant variety, increased, people expanded their plant use. As the open plains grew hotter, they spent more time in the foothills and river bottoms. Their tools changed with their activities. People began to use more plant processing tools like grinding implements and baking hearths for camas and bitterroot. They also needed new technology to hunt the fast-moving mammals of the open plains. They began using smaller, notched stone points attached to a long spear. They could throw the spear, or even better, propel it with an atlatl, a very effective throwing stick for killing animals at a distance. The people adapted to their changing world and thrived. Though each band remained small, about 25 people, the overall population increased. 8,000 years ago, the population was probably very small, 1 person to every 100 to 200 square miles. By 1,500 years ago, people had multiplied to 1 person every 5 square miles. The people shared information with neighboring groups, experimented with new technology, and constantly refined their knowledge of plants, animals, rivers, and weather. The Late Period, Era of the Bison. 2 important things happened about 1,500 years ago, perhaps even earlier, to usher in a new way of life on the high plains. Bison greatly increased in number, and people began to use a powerful new hunting tool, the bow and arrow. Over time, the climate turned cooler and slightly wetter again, nurturing the vast grasslands of the northern plains. Bison thrived in this lush, open environment and spread out across the plains, the Midwest, and even as far south as present-day Alabama. The bison hunters of the northern plains, 1,500 to 300 years ago. Bison had been important to the hunters of the northern plains since the early period, but now they were so plentiful, and the entire animal was so useful, that they became the primary focus of people's hunting and traveling, much of their social life, and many of their ceremonies. The bison was so important to the plains people that they often called him grandfather. Bison supplied food, tools, and the materials of life. In addition to the meat and hides, the people fashioned bison bones and horns into cooking utensils and tools, used the brains to soften hides, burned the chips for cooking fires, braided the hair into ropes and halters, boiled the hooves to make glue, and even used dried bison tails for fly swatters. The sinew, animal tendon, made effective twine. Hair and tails decorated teepees. The hair on the hump made medicine balls. Bladders became water containers, and the hide of the bison was made into clothes, teepee covers, pouches, pipe bags, bedding, shields, splints, and perhaps hundreds of other household items. The bison was present in every part of an Indian's life. For the people of this period, life on the high plains would have been unimaginable without it. Each tribe has several names for bison to reflect its importance as the center of life. Essivan, meaning the sound from within, is the Cheyenne word for bison when it is referred to as a sacred being. Ways of life. The resourceful hunters of the late period were always refining their tools. At some point, hunters developed a strung bow to help propel their points. The bow was so effective for hunting that, as with any helpful new technology, others wanted to adopt it too. Use of the bow spread quickly across the plains. It helped hunters become more accurate and efficient. With plentiful bison and powerful hunting tools, the people of the plains prospered. At some time in the ancient past, dogs became an important part of life on the plains. Dogs have been helpful companions to people all over the world for at least 12,000 to 14,000 years, and for at least 10,000 years in the Americas. People sometimes call the late period the dog days, because dogs were such an important part of everyday life. Dogs help transport gear using a travois, a transport device made of two joined poles and drawn by an animal. With dogs' help, people could transport larger shelters. They developed teepees, which were waterproof, could withstand the roughest weather, and with a few adjustments, stayed warm in winter and cool in summer. The scraped hide walls let in plenty of light, and a lifted wall let in breezes. The edges of teepee linings were held down by stones that encircled the inside of the teepee. People often left these stones in place when they left a campsite, and today, the northern plains are dotted with hundreds of teepee rings, stone circles left after teepee encampments, marking where people camped at different times. The people wore clothing of soft animal skin, loose, straight dresses for women, and leggings, shirts, and short coverings over the hips for men. Their moccasins were made of bison or deer hide. They used bison hide robes and furs of beaver, ermine, rabbit, and other animals to keep warm in winter. Women carried their babies in cradle boards, baby carriers with wooden frames on their backs. The land lives with memories. For thousands of years, many groups of people have lived in and moved through the land we call Montana. They spoke different languages and followed their own traditions. Some of them were the ancestors of the tribal people who live here today. Over time, the people probably visited or crossed every spot in Montana. They used some places many times over generations. The land connects today's Indian people to their ancestors as vividly as any family photo. Tribal place names reflect the people's spiritual connection to the sacred nature of the earth. There are many places in Montana where the ancient people left signs of their presence, in the trails they followed, the stone features they built, and the art they created on rock. These are some of Montana's most special places today. Along the ancient interstate, the Old North Trail. The people developed a complex network of trails and transportation corridors. One of the most important was a footpath that threads along the eastern foothills of the Rockies all the way from the Canadian Arctic south to the Mexican deserts. The Blackfeet know it as the Old North Trail. The Old North Trail winds through gullies, over hills, around buttes, and across stream beds. It detours to meet up with good springs, hunting spots, and campsites. It intersects with other major trails that crisscross the continent. It is the oldest human migration trail in the Western Hemisphere. In Montana, the Old North Trail runs just west of Browning, down through Augusta and the Helena Valley to Three Forks. Here it splits to run east, west, and south. In some places, stone directional markers and ceremonial structures mark the trail. Many artifacts have been found along the Old North Trail. One interesting artifact was a crusty bronze Roman coin, dated 138 AD, found at an ancient teepee ring near Choteau. This kind of artifact is called an anomaly, something peculiar or unexpected.
Cairns and medicine wheels.
People sometimes stacked rocks into a cairn, a pile of stones used as a marker, to mark a trail, a symbolic spot, or other landmark. Sometimes the purpose of an ancient cairn is clear, when used as a grave marker, for example. But the original purpose of many stone cairns is hard to determine. Some cairns are incorporated into larger features, such as medicine wheels, teepee rings, and other structures. Medicine wheels, structures made of stones arrayed in a circle, are some of the most intriguing mysteries of the High Plains. Medicine wheels are stones set in a circle, with lines radiating out for many yards like spokes. The oldest of these wheels have been in place for perhaps 4,000 years. Stories from several Indian tribes attach slightly different meanings to the wheels. Some of them seem to be oriented to point to certain constellations in the sky at summer and winter solstice. Experts say there are about 170 medicine wheels left in the region around Montana, where perhaps many hundreds more used to be. Art and other creations. Art has always been an important way people all over the world record events, express themselves, and share information. One of the earliest art forms is rock art, painting or carving on boulders, cliffs, and cave walls. Like people of many ancient cultures, Montana's early people created pictographs, images painted on rock, and petroglyphs, images carved into rocks, which still can be seen in many places. Pictograph Cave, a National Historic Landmark outside of Billings, is one of the most important cave painting sites in Montana. 3 natural caves in the sandstone cliffs offered shelter for rest and a place for ceremonies over thousands of years. The cave walls bore more than 100 pictographs depicting hunting, ceremonial, and social scenes, as well as marking locations and events. The ground also held the graves of 9 young people from the late period. When the site was first studied, between 1937 and 1941, archaeologists found more than 30,000 artifacts. Many of them were personal belongings from people who used the caves between 4,500 and 200 years ago. People warmed themselves at small fires, sharpening stone points and tools. They shared meals of rabbit, antelope, deer, bison, and shellfish from the Yellowstone River. They also ate wild birds, wild turnips, and other wild plants. The first people there hunted with the atlatl, while later visitors used bows and arrows. They slept on beds of grass, leaves, and sagebrush laid over warm, buried embers. Remnants of leather clothing, fine bone awls, sewing tools used to punch holes, delicate beads, and bone decorations reveal something about the ancient people's craftsmanship and appreciation for artfulness. Game pieces, whistles, and carved figures tell us a little more about how they spent their recreational time. Some Montanans believe Pictograph Cave is the single most significant archaeological site in Montana because it has such a rich history of human activity. Life on the edge of great change. By about 500 years ago, 350 different languages were spoken in North America. People of many different bands and traditions thrived in a variety of landscapes, from coastline to mountaintops, from forests to high prairies. They had adapted to many changes over thousands of years. The arrival of Europeans was about to transform their world again. How it worked. Buffalo jumps and bison drives. One spectacular event in the lives of the later bison hunters was the bison drive. Many people would work together to drive or lure a herd of bison into a natural trap or over a cliff. Different groups organized bison drives differently. They would often take days to prepare. If a good buffalo jump was available, people set piles of stones in a large V shape to create a drive line, a stone formation like a runway toward the cliff. Often a buffalo runner, wearing the hide of a bison calf, would draw the lead cow toward the jump by bleating like a distressed calf. Others would startle the herd from behind, getting them moving toward the cliff. When the bison drew near the cliff, the people frightened them into a stampede. As the animals tumbled over the cliff, hunters at the bottom would kill any still alive. Others waiting alongside the cliff would move in for
butchering
and processing. If a good jump site was not available, the people would build a bison pound, a corral-like enclosure used to trap bison, of brush, rock, and large bones. They again piled stones to create a drive line toward the pound. As the animals neared the enclosure, hidden hunters jumped up and shouted to stampede the bison into the trap. Once the animals were in the pound, the hunters were able to kill the bison relatively safely and easily. The communal, shared bison drive must be one of the most remarkable hunting methods ever devised. It was technically difficult. Bison are huge, unpredictable, and flighty, yet the people could somehow make whole herds move many miles. In addition to their tools and techniques developed over time, the people also used spiritual offerings, prayers, and ceremonial knowledge to bring the animals to the people.